My husband had been buried for less than 2 hours when my daughter-in-law pulled me aside at the funeral reception and asked a question that made my blood run cold. "Janet, when are you giving me the jewelry?" Not, "How are you holding up?" Not, "I'm sorry for your loss." Just the jewelry. I stood there in my black dress, still numb from losing Robert after 42 years of marriage while my son said nothing. She thought those diamonds would become hers. What she didn't know was that 3 weeks later, I gave every single piece away, and what happened next changed our family forever. If this story touches your heart, I'd love for you to stay with me until the end. Please like and subscribe if you enjoy stories about family resilience and unexpected justice. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done in my situation? Also let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. I always enjoy hearing from you. For 42 years, Robert Arnold was the first person I spoke to every morning and the last person I spoke to every night. Even now, months later, I still sometimes woke up reaching across the bed, expecting to find him there. Instead, my hand met cold sheets. The silence that followed was always unbearable. Robert and I had built our life together from almost nothing. When we married in 1982, neither of us had much money. He worked as a mechanic at a small garage outside Columbus, Ohio, and I worked the front desk at a dental office. We rented a tiny apartment with creaky floors and a leaky kitchen sink. But we were happy. Over the years, we saved every extra dollar we could. We raised our son, Daniel. We paid off our mortgage. We survived layoffs, medical scares, and the countless challenges that come with building a family. Through all of it, Robert remained the kindest man I had ever known. He wasn't perfect. Nobody is. But he was honest, loyal, dependable. The kind of man who would stop on the side of the road to help a stranger change a tire. The kind of man who remembered every anniversary. The kind of man who still held my hand during movies, even after 40 years of marriage. When he died from heart failure at 71, it felt like half of me had been buried with him. The funeral took place on a gray Thursday morning. Rain tapped softly against the church windows. Friends, neighbors, former coworkers, and relatives filled the pews. Everyone had something kind to say about Robert. Everyone except one person. Looking back now, I think the warning signs were there all along. I just didn't want to see them. After the service, everyone gathered in the church fellowship hall for coffee sandwiches and conversation. I barely remember most of it. People hugged me. They shared stories. They offered condolences. I smiled politely and thanked them. Inside, I felt completely numb. I was standing near a table covered with family photographs when Megan approached me. My daughter-in-law looked perfectly put together. Her black dress was elegant. Her makeup was flawless. Not a single tear stained her face. At first, I thought she was coming to comfort me. I was wrong. "Janet," she said quietly. "Can we talk for a minute?" I nodded. She guided me toward an empty corner of the room. The moment we were alone, her expression changed. The sympathy disappeared. The warmth vanished. And then she asked the question. "So, when are you planning to give me the jewelry?" For a moment, I genuinely thought I had misunderstood her. "The jewelry?" I asked. She smiled. "The family jewelry. Robert promised it would eventually come to me." I stared at her. My husband had been dead for less than 2 hours. Less than 2 hours. And this was what she'd wanted to discuss. Not my grief. Not Robert's memory. Not our family. Jewelry. I felt my stomach tighten. "What are you talking about?" I asked. "The jewelry collection," she repeated. "The diamond necklace, the sapphire bracelet, the earrings. Robert told me years ago they would stay in the family." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Those pieces weren't just expensive accessories. They carried decades of memories. The diamond necklace had been Robert's gift on our 25th wedding anniversary. The sapphire bracelet had belonged to his mother. The pearl earrings came from his grandmother. Each piece represented part of our family's history. Megan wasn't talking about heirlooms. She was talking about assets. I could hear it in her voice. I don't remember Robert saying anything about that, I replied carefully. Her smile became thinner. He told me personally. Something about the way she said it made me uncomfortable. Too confident. Too rehearsed. Almost as if she had been waiting for this conversation. Before I could respond, I noticed Daniel standing across the room. Our eyes met. Relief flooded through me. Surely my son would recognize how inappropriate this moment was. Surely he would tell Megan to stop. Surely he would protect his grieving mother. Instead, he simply looked away. That hurt more than Megan's words. I excused myself and walked toward the restroom. Once the door closed behind me, I leaned against the sink and took a shaky breath. My reflection looked exhausted, older, broken. I barely recognized myself. All morning, I had been trying to survive losing my husband. Now I suddenly felt something else. Fear. Not fear of being alone. Fear that something inside my family had changed without me realizing it. The rest of the reception passed in a blur. Several times, I caught Megan glancing in my direction. Each time, she wore the same calculating expression, as though she were already making plans, as though the jewelry already belonged to her. Later that afternoon, after everyone had gone home, I sat alone in the living room. The house felt impossibly quiet. Robert's favorite recliner stood empty. His reading glasses still rested on the side table. A half-finished crossword puzzle remained exactly where he had left it. I stared at those ordinary things and cried harder than I had cried at the funeral. Because grief doesn't always arrive in public. Sometimes it waits until you're alone. Sometimes it hits when you see a coffee mug that will never be used again, or a jacket hanging by the door, or an empty chair. As evening approached, my phone rang. It was Daniel. For a moment, I felt hopeful. Maybe he wanted to check on me. Maybe he wanted to apologize for Megan's behavior. Maybe he wanted to be the son I needed. "Hi, Mom," he said. His voice sounded unusually cautious. "Hi." There was a brief pause. Then he asked, "Are you upset about what Megan said earlier?" The question instantly made my chest tighten. "Your father was buried today, Daniel." "I know." "Then why are we talking about jewelry?" Another pause. Longer this time. When he finally spoke, his words sent a chill through me. "Mom, Megan wasn't trying to be insensitive. She was just asking about something Dad already promised." I closed my eyes. There it was. Not comfort, not support, agreement. My own son was backing her up. "What exactly did your father promise?" I asked quietly. Daniel hesitated. "I don't know all the details." "But you believe her." "I think Dad wanted the jewelry to stay in the family." The family. The phrase echoed in my mind. As though I wasn't family. As though the woman who spent 42 years beside Robert somehow mattered less than his daughter-in-law. After we ended the call, I sat in silence for a long time. Outside rain continued falling against the windows. Inside, something much colder settled into my heart. Because for the first time, I found myself wondering a question I never thought I'd ask. Had Robert seen this coming? And if he had, what hadn't he told me? The following morning, I woke up exhausted. Not physically, emotionally. The kind of exhaustion that settles deep inside your bones after too many sleepless nights and too many painful thoughts. For several minutes, I simply lay in bed staring at the ceiling. The house was quiet, painfully quiet. For 42 years, mornings had started with Robert. The smell of coffee, the sound of his footsteps, the familiar greeting he'd say every day. "Morning, sweetheart." Now there was nothing, only silence. I eventually forced myself out of bed and wandered through the house. Every room felt haunted by memories. The kitchen, where we'd shared thousands of meals. The living room, where we'd watched movies together. The backyard, where Robert spent entire summers tending his tomatoes. Every corner reminded me of what I had lost, and yet my thoughts kept returning to something else. Megan, her words at the funeral, the certainty in her voice, the way Daniel had supported her. Something wasn't right. By late afternoon, I found myself standing in front of the small safe hidden inside our bedroom closet. I hadn't opened it since Robert's funeral. For years, it had held important documents, family keepsakes, and the jewelry collection. I hesitated. Then I entered the combination. The metal door clicked open. Inside sat a black velvet jewelry box. I carefully lifted it out and placed it on the bed. For several moments, I simply stared at it. This wasn't a collection of expensive items. It was a collection of memories. My fingers trembled slightly as I opened the lid. The first thing I saw was the diamond necklace. Robert had given it to me on our 25th wedding anniversary. I still remembered that evening perfectly. We had gone to a small restaurant overlooking a lake. Nothing extravagant, just the two of us. When dessert arrived, he handed me a tiny wrapped box. I had laughed when I opened it, not because of the necklace, because he looked more nervous than I did. "You'd think I was proposing all over again," he had joked. I smiled sadly at the memory. Then I picked up a sapphire bracelet. That piece had belonged to Robert's mother, Eleanor. She gave it to me shortly before she passed away. I remembered her holding my hands and saying, "You're the daughter I never had." Tears filled my eyes. Next came a pair of pearl earrings. They had belonged to Robert's grandmother. They weren't worth much financially, but they represented generations of family history. I carefully returned them to their place. Then I noticed something unusual. The velvet lining at the bottom of the box appeared slightly raised. At first, I thought nothing of it, but curiosity made me investigate. I gently lifted the fabric. My breath caught. There was an envelope hidden underneath. I stared at it in disbelief. The envelope was yellowed and sealed. Across the front, written in familiar handwriting, were 3 words: "For Janet only." My heart immediately began pounding. Robert's handwriting, there was no mistake. I would have recognized it anywhere. Suddenly, the room felt smaller. The air felt heavier. With shaking hands, I opened the envelope. Inside was a folded sheet of paper. I carefully unfolded it. The first line nearly made me cry. "My dearest Janet, if you're reading this, then I'm no longer there to say these things myself." Tears immediately blurred my vision. I wiped them away and continued reading. "First, I need you to know something. I have loved you every day of our life together. Not most days, not good days. Every day." I pressed the paper against my chest for a moment. That sounded exactly like Robert. Simple, honest, real. Then the tone of the letter changed, and everything changed with it. "There is something important I need you to trust me about. Trust your instincts, especially when it comes to the jewelry." I sat upright. The jewelry. Robert was talking about the very thing Megan had demanded. I continued reading. "If anyone pressures you for these pieces, do not let guilt influence your decision. They belong to you, and only you should decide their future." A chill ran down my spine. It was as though Robert had somehow anticipated everything that had happened after his death. Then I reached the sentence that truly shocked me. "Be particularly careful around Megan." I froze. My eyes moved over the line again and again. Surely I had misunderstood, but the words remained the same. "Be particularly careful around Megan." My pulse quickened. Robert had always been polite toward Megan, never rude, never openly critical. Why would he write something like this? I kept reading. There are things I have observed that concern me. I cannot explain everything in this letter, but please know that my concerns are not based on one incident. Trust yourself, trust what you see, and do not allow anyone to pressure you into decisions you do not want to make. I lowered the letter. The room spun slightly. For several minutes, I simply sat there, confused, shocked, trying to make sense of what I had read. Robert wasn't a dramatic man. He wasn't suspicious by nature. If he felt strongly enough to leave this warning behind, there had to be a reason, a serious reason. Yet he hadn't explained what that reason was. I returned to the letter. Near the bottom, his handwriting appeared shakier. His health had been declining during his final months. That much was obvious. The last paragraph read, "One day you may learn things that surprise you. When that day comes, remember this. You are stronger than you think. And no amount of money, jewelry, or inheritance is worth sacrificing your dignity. I love you. Always. Robert." I stared at his signature. Eventually, tears began rolling down my cheeks. Not dramatic sobs, just quiet tears. The kind that come from missing someone so deeply that words cannot describe it. For nearly an hour, I sat alone, holding that letter, thinking, remembering, wondering. Had Robert discovered something before he died? Had Megan done something he never told me about? And why hadn't he explained more? The questions refused to leave my mind. That evening, I made myself dinner, but barely touched it. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table rereading the letter. Each time I read it, new details stood out. His careful wording, his repeated emphasis on trust, his direct mention of Megan. The more I thought about it, the less comfortable I felt. Then another memory surfaced. About 6 months before Robert died, I had walked into the living room unexpectedly and found him arguing with someone on the phone. The moment he noticed me, he ended the call. When I asked what happened, he smiled and said it was nothing important. At the time, I believed him. Now I wasn't so sure. Around 9 o'clock, my phone buzzed. A text message. Megan. My stomach tightened before I even opened it. The message was short. Have you had a chance to think about the jewelry? I stared at the screen. No greeting, no concern, no mention of Robert, just the jewelry. Again. For the first time since the funeral, anger replaced my grief. Not overwhelming anger. Not yet, but enough to make something clear. Megan wasn't going to let this go, and according to Robert's letter, neither should I. I slowly locked my phone and looked down at the page in my hands. Trust your instincts. Those 4 words echoed through my mind, and for the first time, I found myself asking a question that frightened me. What exactly had Robert discovered before he died? Because whatever it was, I was beginning to think it was much bigger than a collection of jewelry. For the next several days, Robert's letter never left my mind. I carried it with me from room to room like a fragile piece of treasure. Every morning, I reread it over coffee. Every night, I read it again, before bed. His words comforted me, but they also unsettled me. Especially the part about Megan. The more I thought about it, the more questions I had. Yet I still wasn't prepared for what happened the following Saturday. That morning, my doorbell rang around 10. When I looked through the front window, I saw Daniel standing on the porch. For the first time in days, I felt relieved. Maybe my son had finally come to check on me. Maybe he had realized how hurtful the funeral conversation had been. Maybe he missed his father as much as I did. I quickly opened the door. Daniel. Hi, Mom. I stepped aside and invited him in. He looked tired. Dark circles hung beneath his eyes. His shoulders seemed heavier than usual. For a brief moment, I felt hopeful. We sat in the kitchen. I poured him a cup of coffee. The same coffee Robert used to drink every morning. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Then I finally asked, "How are you holding up?" Daniel shrugged. It's been hard." I nodded. "I know." Silence settled between us again. I waited for him to talk about his father, about memories, about grief, about anything meaningful. Instead, he surprised me. "Mom, we should probably talk about the jewelry." My stomach immediately dropped. There it was again. The jewelry. Not Dad, not family, not loss. The jewelry. I slowly placed my coffee cup on the table. "That's why you came here?" Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "It's something that needs to be addressed." I stared at him. This was the little boy I had raised. The little boy who used to climb into my lap after nightmares. The teenager whose football games Robert and I never missed. The young man I had loved with every part of my heart. Yet somehow, he felt like a stranger. "Your father has been gone less than a month," I said quietly. "I know." "Then why does everyone seem more interested in jewelry than in grieving him?" Daniel rubbed his forehead. "Mom, that's not fair." "Isn't it?" He looked away. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he finally sighed. "Megan isn't trying to hurt you." I almost laughed, not because it was funny, because it was unbelievable. "Really?" "She's just thinking about the future." "The future," I repeated. "Yes." I folded my arms. "What exactly does that mean?" Daniel hesitated. Then he said something that immediately caught my attention. "Dad always wanted those pieces to stay in the family." The phrase again. Stay in the family? As though I wasn't family. As though my role in all of this had somehow ended the moment Robert died. "I am the family," I replied. His expression tightened. "You know that's not what I mean." "No, Daniel. I don't know what you mean." He leaned back in his chair. For the first time, frustration appeared on his face. "Megan has been part of this family for 16 years. I know. She's Sophie's mother? I know. She deserves consideration." I stared at him. "Deserves consideration?" "Yes." I took a slow breath. "Your father gave me those pieces. They were family heirlooms. They were also gifts." Daniel shook his head. "We're talking about a collection worth a lot of money." There it was. Money. The word neither Megan nor Daniel had openly said before. Now it finally surfaced. And suddenly Robert's warning felt more important than ever. I watched my son carefully. "How much trouble are you in?" His eyes widened. The reaction was instant. Too instant. "What?" "How much trouble are you in financially?" His face paled slightly. For a moment I thought he might deny it. Instead, he looked down at the table. That told me everything. My heart sank. "Daniel." "It's complicated." "Then explain it." He remained silent. I waited. Eventually, he exhaled heavily. "Megan and I have had some setbacks." What kind of setbacks?" He hesitated. Then another sigh escaped him. "We have debt." The word hung in the air. Debt. I had suspected financial problems, but hearing him admit it made my chest tighten. "How much?" "I don't want to discuss numbers." That answer told me the amount was significant. I sat back in my chair. "When did this happen? Over the last few years?" I couldn't hide my shock. "You never said anything." "I didn't want you worrying." I almost pointed out the irony. He didn't want me worrying, yet he had no problem pressuring me for valuable jewelry while I was grieving. Instead, I remained calm. "What caused the debt?" Again, hesitation. Then he answered. "Business investments." I frowned. Daniel had changed jobs twice in recent years. He had also talked about several business opportunities. Most of them sounded risky. Apparently, some had been worse than I realized. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough." The room felt heavier. For the first time, I began seeing pieces of the puzzle. Megan's obsession, Daniel's silence, their sudden urgency. This wasn't about sentimental value. It was about money, a lot of money. And if the jewelry truly held substantial value, they already had plans for it. Plans that didn't include me. Does Megan know how serious the situation is? I asked. Daniel laughed bitterly. She knows. Something about his tone caught my attention. There was resentment hidden beneath it, small but unmistakable. I leaned forward. Daniel, are you happy? His eyes met mine. For a brief second, I saw something unexpected. Pain. Real pain. Then the expression vanished. I'm fine. The answer came too quickly, too automatically. I remembered Robert's letter. Trust your instincts. My instincts told me my son was drowning, but I wasn't sure whether he even realized it. The conversation continued for nearly another hour. Most of it went nowhere. Daniel kept returning to the same point. The jewelry should go to Megan. The jewelry would stay in the family. The jewelry represented Robert's wishes. Each argument sounded rehearsed, as though he had practiced them beforehand. Finally, I stood. I haven't made any decisions. His jaw tightened. You need to. No. The firmness in my voice surprised even me. I don't need to do anything. His expression darkened. Mom? No, Daniel. I looked directly at him. For 42 years, your father and I built our life together. He remained silent. I'm still grieving. Silence. And if anyone expects me to rush into decisions because they're impatient, they're going to be disappointed. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then Daniel slowly stood. I'll tell Megan what you said. Something about those words bothered me. Not, I'll respect your decision. Not, I understand. Just, I'll tell Megan. As though she were the one in charge. As though he answered to her. He walked toward the door. Before leaving, he paused. For a moment, I thought he might finally say something about Robert. Maybe share a memory. Maybe tell me he loved me. Maybe apologize. Instead, he said something else. You don't understand how important this is. Then he left. I watched through the window as he climbed into his car and drove away. The moment he disappeared from sight, I sat down heavily on the couch. My hands trembled. Not from fear, from heartbreak. Because Robert had been right. Something was wrong. Very wrong. And for the first time, I wasn't just worried about Megan. I was worried about my son. What frightened me most wasn't the debt. It wasn't the jewelry. It wasn't even the pressure. It was the realization that Daniel had become willing to sacrifice his relationship with his grieving mother for something he clearly believed he desperately needed. And deep inside, I had the uncomfortable feeling that I still hadn't learned the worst of it. For the next 2 days, I couldn't stop thinking about my conversation with Daniel, not because of what he had said, because of what he hadn't said. He never once talked about missing his father. He never mentioned Robert's funeral. He never asked how I was coping. Everything revolved around the jewelry. And now I knew why. Money, debt, desperation. Still, something didn't add up. If Daniel and Megan were struggling financially, why had Robert specifically warned me about Megan? Why not both of them? Why hide that note inside the jewelry box? And what exactly had Robert discovered before he died? The answers weren't in the letter. But I had a feeling someone else might know more. So on Tuesday morning, I drove across town to Bennett Jewelers. The shop sat on a quiet street in downtown Columbus. It had been there for nearly 50 years. Robert trusted very few people outside our family. Thomas Bennett was one of them. The two men had been friends since their 20s. When Robert bought anniversary gifts or had family pieces cleaned, he always went to Thomas. As I pushed open the shop door, a small bell chimed overhead. The familiar scent of polished wood and jewelry cleaner greeted me. Almost immediately, Thomas emerged from the back office. His face softened when he saw me. "Janet." He walked around the counter and gently hugged me. "I'm so sorry about Robert." Those simple words nearly made me cry, because unlike some people, Thomas sounded sincere. "Thank you," I whispered. We sat down in his office. For several minutes we talked about Robert. Old stories, funny memories, the kind of conversations grieving people desperately need. Then I carefully placed the jewelry box on his desk. Thomas immediately recognized it. His expression changed. Not dramatically, just enough for me to notice. "You remember this box?" I asked. "Of course." His eyes remained fixed on it. "What would you like me to do?" "I want an appraisal." Thomas blinked. "An appraisal?" "Yes." He hesitated, then slowly nodded. "All right." For the next hour, he examined each piece. He weighed them, measured them, inspected every stone through a magnifying lens. The entire time I sat quietly across from him. Eventually, he removed his glasses. The expression on his face surprised me. He looked almost uncomfortable. "What is it?" I asked. Thomas leaned back. "Janet, have you ever had this collection formally appraised?" "No." His eyebrows rose. "Never." Robert handled those things. Thomas let out a long breath. Then he picked up a folder. "The collection is worth significantly more than most people would assume." I frowned. "How much more?" He opened the folder. My eyes widened. I genuinely thought he had made a mistake. $382,000, Thomas nodded. "Approximately." I stared at the number. $382,000. I knew the collection had value, but not that kind of value. Not even close. Suddenly, everything made a little more sense. Megan's obsession, Daniel's pressure, their impatience. This wasn't about sentimental heirlooms. This was nearly $400,000. Enough money to solve serious financial problems. Enough money to make desperate people behave badly. Thomas quietly closed the folder. Then he said something unexpected. "Robert came here about 4 months ago." My heart skipped. 4 months ago? He nodded. "Yes." Immediately I sat up straighter. "Why?" Thomas looked uncertain, as though deciding how much he should say. Finally, he stood and walked toward a filing cabinet. After a moment, he returned holding a large sealed envelope. My pulse quickened. Across the front were 6 handwritten words. "Give to Janet if needed." Robert's handwriting. Again. I could barely breathe. Thomas placed the envelope on the desk. "He asked me to keep this." "When?" "The same day he had the jewelry appraised." I stared at the envelope. My husband had planned for something important, something serious. "Why didn't he tell me?" Thomas sighed. "Because he believed he would have more time." The words hit harder than I expected. More time. Everyone thinks they have more time. Until they don't. I carefully opened the envelope. Inside was another letter, along with several documents. The letter was addressed directly to me, "My dearest Janet, if Thomas has given you this envelope, then circumstances unfolded the way I feared they might." Immediately my chest tightened. I continued reading. "Over the last year, I have become increasingly concerned about certain conversations involving Megan. I have tried to give her the benefit of the doubt, but some of her questions have troubled me. Questions about ownership, questions about inheritance, questions about timelines." I felt a chill run through me. Questions about timelines. What an unsettling phrase. I continued reading. Several times she asked what would happen to the jewelry collection after my death. At first, I assumed it was harmless curiosity. Eventually, I became less certain. I lowered the page. Thomas watched quietly. "Did Robert ever tell you any of this?" I asked. He slowly shook his head. "Not directly." I returned to the letter. "There was more, much more. If anything happens to me, I want you to know 2 things. First, the jewelry belongs entirely to you. Second, I have already discussed a potential charitable use for the collection." My eyes widened. Charitable use? That wasn't mentioned in the first letter. I read faster. "For years, I have quietly supported an organization that helps older women who become victims of financial manipulation by relatives and caregivers. The work they do matters, more than diamonds ever will." I felt my throat tighten. That sounded exactly like Robert. Even from beyond the grave, he was thinking about helping others. Attached to the letter were several pages describing a charitable foundation. I flipped through them. Detailed notes, financial projections, letters, plans. Robert had spent months researching this organization. Months! Thomas pointed toward one page. He was very serious about it. I looked up. "You knew a little." "How much?" Thomas folded his hands. "Robert wanted to create something meaningful." I glanced down again. One sentence immediately caught my attention. Potential future name, the Janet Arnold Assistance Fund. I stared at the words. My vision blurred. The Janet Arnold Assistance Fund. My name? Not Robert's. Mine. Tears filled my eyes. Even after 42 years together, my husband had somehow found new ways to surprise me. "He wanted to name it after me," I whispered. Thomas smiled sadly. "He talked about it often." I couldn't speak. For several moments, neither of us said anything. Then Thomas cleared his throat. "There is one more thing." I looked up. His expression had grown serious again. "Robert asked me a question during that meeting." "What question?" Thomas hesitated, then answered. "He asked what someone might do if they suddenly expected a large inheritance." A knot formed in my stomach. "What did you tell him?" Thomas looked uncomfortable. I said some people become impatient. Silence. "Some become entitled." More silence. "And some make mistakes." I stared at him. The meaning was clear. Robert hadn't been paranoid. He had been preparing for something he hoped would never happen, something involving Megan. Possibly Daniel, maybe both. As I gathered the papers and placed them back into the envelope, a realization settled over me. The jewelry was never just jewelry, not to Robert, not anymore. It had become a test of character, a test of values, a test that certain people in my family were already failing. As I stood to leave, Thomas gently touched my shoulder. "Robert trusted you, Janet." I swallowed hard. "I know. He wanted you to make the right decision." I looked down at the envelope in my hands. For the first time since his death, I felt something other than grief. Purpose. But beneath that feeling lurked something darker. Because Robert's letters had answered one question. He had been worried. Very worried. Yet they also raised another. If Robert knew this much before he died, how much worse was the truth I still hadn't uncovered? 3 days after my visit to Thomas Bennett's jewelry store, Megan called. The moment I saw her name on my phone screen, I considered letting it ring. But something stopped me. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was Robert's warnings. Maybe I simply wanted to see how far she was willing to go. So I answered. "Hello?" Her voice sounded unusually cheerful. "Janet, I was hoping you'd pick up." The sudden friendliness immediately made me suspicious. "What can I do for you, Megan?" "I wanted to invite you to dinner." I frowned. "Dinner?" "Yes, just family." Family. Lately that word seemed to mean whatever benefited Megan. When? Saturday evening. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to refuse. Another part wanted answers. Eventually, I agreed. "All right. Wonderful," she said. "We'll see you then." The call ended. For several moments, I stared at my phone. Something about the invitation felt calculated. I couldn't explain why, but my instincts were already warning me. And after everything Robert had written, I was finally learning to trust those instincts. Saturday arrived. Around 6 o'clock, I drove to Daniel and Megan's house. The neighborhood was one of the nicer developments outside Columbus. Large homes, perfect lawns, expensive vehicles, the kind of place people often move into before they can comfortably afford it. As I parked in the driveway, I noticed Daniel's SUV and Megan's luxury crossover, the vehicle she'd purchased only a year earlier, a vehicle that suddenly seemed difficult to justify for a family supposedly drowning in debt. I pushed that thought aside and walked to the front door. Megan greeted me with a bright smile. Too bright. Too practiced. "Janet, you look wonderful." I almost laughed. The woman who had pressured me for jewelry at my husband's funeral was suddenly acting like my best friend. "Thank you." She hugged me. The gesture felt forced. Then she led me inside. The dining table was beautifully arranged. Candles, fresh flowers, good china. The entire evening felt strangely formal. Daniel seemed uncomfortable from the moment I arrived. He smiled politely, but rarely made eye contact. That alone told me plenty. Sophie, however, looked genuinely happy to see me. The 15-year-old rushed over and hugged me. "Hi, Grandma." For the first time all evening, I smiled. "Hi, sweetheart." At least one person in the house still seemed sincere. Dinner itself was surprisingly pleasant. At first. We talked about school, neighborhood events, television shows, anything except the obvious topic. For nearly an hour, nobody mentioned Robert. Nobody mentioned the jewelry. Nobody mentioned inheritance. It was almost enough to make me lower my guard. Almost. Then dessert arrived, and everything changed. Sophie excused herself to finish a school project upstairs. The moment she disappeared, Megan set down her fork. Her smile vanished. The performance was over. I recognized the transition instantly. Daniel recognized it too. His shoulders visibly tightened. "Megan," he said cautiously. She ignored him. Instead, she looked directly at me. "I think this is a good time to discuss the jewelry." There it was, the real reason for the invitation. Not family, not reconciliation. Business. I slowly placed my coffee cup down. "I see." Daniel rubbed his forehead. "Megan, no," she interrupted. "We need to settle this." The room suddenly felt colder. "What exactly needs settling?" I asked. Her expression hardened. "The collection belongs with the next generation." I remained calm. "According to whom?" According to Robert." The lie no longer surprised me. What surprised me was how confidently she repeated it, as though saying something enough times could make it true. I folded my hands. "Robert never told me that." "He told me." I stared at her. "Convenient." Her jaw tightened. For a second, I saw genuine irritation flash across her face. Then she reached beside her chair. What happened next stunned me. She pulled out a folder she had apparently prepared before I even arrived. Slowly, she slid it across the table. "What is this?" I asked. "Transfer documents?" I blinked. "Transfer documents?" "Yes." I opened the folder. Inside were legal forms, ownership forms, property transfer paperwork, documents prepared specifically for the jewelry collection. I looked up. "Megan, are you serious?" "Completely." The level of planning shocked me. She hadn't come to discuss possibilities. She had come expecting a signature. Tonight had been an ambush, a carefully planned one. Daniel looked miserable. "Megan, maybe we should—" "No!" Her voice sharpened. For the first time, the mask began slipping. The friendly hostess disappeared. The entitled woman underneath emerged. She pointed toward the papers. All you need to do is sign. I stared at her. The audacity was breathtaking. My husband had been dead for only a few weeks, and here sat my daughter-in-law presenting transfer documents as though we were closing a business deal. No. The word left my mouth calmly, firmly, absolutely. Megan blinked. What? No. The silence that followed felt explosive. For a moment, she seemed genuinely shocked, as though the possibility had never occurred to her. Then her expression darkened. You haven't even looked at everything. I've seen enough. Her eyes narrowed. Janet, you're being unreasonable. The accusation almost made me laugh. Unreasonable, not greedy, not manipulative, not disrespectful. Apparently, I was the unreasonable one. I slowly closed the folder. My answer is no. Something changed inside Megan. The transformation was immediate. The sweetness disappeared completely. The politeness vanished. What remained was anger. Raw anger. Do you have any idea what you're doing? I held her gaze. Yes. You are destroying this family? The irony was astonishing. She was trying to pressure a grieving widow into surrendering nearly $400,000 worth of assets. Yet somehow, I was the problem. Daniel finally spoke. Megan. But she wasn't listening anymore. She had lost control, and now the real Megan was standing in front of me. You know what people are saying, she snapped. I frowned. What people? Family. A chill ran through me. What are they saying? Her smile returned, except this time it wasn't pleasant. It was cruel. They think you've changed since Robert died. I stared at her. What does that mean? Megan leaned forward. They think you're confused. The words hit me like a slap. Confused, at 68 years old, because I wouldn't hand over valuable jewelry. Suddenly, everything became clear. The phone calls from relatives, the strange comments, the unusual questions. Megan had been laying groundwork, planting seeds, creating a narrative. My stomach turned. You've been talking about me. She didn't deny it. That told me everything. Daniel looked horrified. Megan, stop. But she kept going. If people think you're struggling emotionally, maybe they have a point. I sat perfectly still. The room felt silent except for the sound of my heartbeat. This wasn't about inheritance anymore. This was about reputation, control, manipulation. Robert had been right, every word. Then came the threat. The moment that changed everything. If you don't sign, Megan said quietly, things are going to become very difficult. My eyes narrowed. Is that a threat? She smiled. Call it reality? Daniel immediately stood. That's enough. For the first time all evening he sounded angry, genuinely angry. But Megan wasn't finished. She folded her arms. Daniel and I make decisions together. Then she looked directly at me. And if you keep fighting us, don't be surprised if family relationships change. The meaning was unmistakable. Access to Sophie, future holidays, family gatherings, everything. She was willing to use it all as leverage. The room fell silent. I slowly stood. My chair scraped against the floor. The sound seemed unusually loud. I picked up my purse. Then I looked directly at Megan. For the first time since Robert died, I felt no uncertainty, no guilt, no hesitation, only clarity. You've made one mistake. Her confidence faltered slightly. What mistake? I met her eyes. You assumed I didn't know who you really are. Then I walked toward the door. Behind me, nobody spoke. Not Megan, not Daniel, not even me, because there was nothing left to say. As I drove home that night, Robert's words echoed through my mind once again. Trust your instincts. For weeks, I had been searching for proof. Now I didn't need proof. I had seen the truth with my own eyes, and something told me Megan had no idea how badly she had just underestimated me. The morning after dinner at Daniel and Megan's house, I sat alone at my kitchen table and reread every letter Robert had left behind. The first note from the jewelry box, the second letter from Thomas Bennett, the charitable foundation documents. I spread everything across the table and studied them carefully. For weeks, I had been focused on one question. What was Megan trying to take? Now a different question seemed more important. What was Robert trying to give? The answer wasn't money. It wasn't jewelry. And it certainly wasn't diamonds. It was something much bigger. Purpose. By noon, I had made a decision. I picked up the phone and called the organization Robert had mentioned. A woman answered after the second ring. Hope Harbor Women's Assistance Center. This is Linda speaking. My heart immediately tightened. This was the organization Robert had quietly supported. Hello, I said. My name is Janet Arnold. There was a brief pause. Then her voice softened. Janet Arnold, yes. Oh my goodness. The reaction surprised me. You know who I am. Of course, I frowned. How? Another pause. Then she answered gently. Your husband talked about you all the time. I closed my eyes. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Even now, months after his death, hearing someone mention Robert felt like reopening a wound. Yet, there was comfort in it too. What exactly did he say? I asked quietly. Linda laughed softly. He said you were the strongest person he had ever met. Tears immediately filled my eyes. That sounded exactly like Robert. For 42 years, whenever I doubted myself, he believed in me enough for both of us. Linda invited me to visit the center the following day. I agreed. The next afternoon, I drove to a modest brick building on the east side of Columbus. The sign outside read, Hope Harbor Women's Assistance Center. Nothing about the place looked extravagant. No marble floors, no luxury offices, no expensive decorations. Just a clean building filled with people trying to help others. Linda Brooks greeted me at the entrance. She was around my age, maybe a little younger. Warm eyes, kind smile. The sort of person who instantly made others feel comfortable. She hugged me before I even stepped fully inside. I'm so sorry about Robert. Thank you. For the next hour, she gave me a tour. What I saw changed me. Hope Harbor wasn't simply a charity. It was a lifeline. They helped older women who had been financially exploited by family members, widows whose children drained their bank accounts, grandmothers pressured into signing away homes, elderly women manipulated into surrendering retirement savings. Some stories were heartbreaking. One woman lost nearly everything after trusting her grandson. Another had been forced out of her own house. Another spent years believing she deserved the abuse because it came from family. As Linda spoke, a chill spread through me. Because suddenly Robert's concerns made even more sense. Financial abuse. The phrase echoed in my mind. I had never considered it before. Not seriously. Yet here were dozens of examples. Real women, real victims, real families. Linda eventually led me into a conference room. A folder already sat waiting on the table. She smiled. Robert helped create some of these plans. My pulse quickened. He did. She nodded. Quite a few. I opened the folder. Inside were documents I had never seen. Letters, financial proposals, notes written in Robert's handwriting. One page immediately caught my attention. Potential expansion program funded by future estate donation. I stared at the words. Robert had been planning this for a long time, long before his illness worsened, long before his death, long before Megan's demands. Linda watched quietly as I turned pages. Eventually, I reached a section titled The Janet Arnold Assistance Fund. My breath caught. There it was again. My name. Not because Robert wanted attention. Not because he wanted recognition, and because he wanted me involved. I looked up. When did he create this? Linda smiled sadly. About 8 months ago. 8 months. He had spent nearly a year planning this without telling me. At first, I felt slightly hurt. Then I remembered Robert's personality. He had always loved surprises, especially meaningful ones. He really intended this? I asked. Linda nodded. Absolutely. I looked back down. Attached to the proposal was a handwritten note. The moment I recognized Robert's handwriting, my eyes filled again. Linda gave me privacy while I read, Janet. If this plan ever reaches you, it means life unfolded differently than I hoped. But please know this. The jewelry was never the treasure, you were. I immediately pressed my hand against my mouth. The tears came before I could stop them. For several moments, I couldn't continue reading. Eventually, I forced myself forward. The diamonds have value. The sapphires have value. The pearls have value. But none of them compare to what you have given this family for 42 years. If these pieces can help other women protect themselves, then their purpose becomes greater than beauty. And if anyone is strong enough to make that decision, it's you. I love you, Robert. By the time I finished reading, tears streamed freely down my face. Not just from grief, from love, from gratitude, from realizing how deeply my husband had understood me. When Linda returned, she handed me a tissue. I laughed softly through the tears. He always knew how to surprise me. Yes, she said. He did. We spent the rest of the afternoon discussing the center, the programs, the women they helped, the future Robert had envisioned. For the first time since his death, I felt something shifting inside me. My grief remained. It always would. But beneath it, something new was growing. Purpose, hope, direction. Then Linda said something unexpected. Can I tell you a secret? I smiled. Of course. She leaned forward. The first time Robert visited, he wasn't interested in donating. I blinked. He wasn't. She laughed. No. That surprised me. Then why did he come? Her smile widened. He came because he was worried about you. I stared at her. What do you mean? He said he wanted to learn how financial abuse begins. The room suddenly felt very quiet. I felt my stomach tighten. Why? Linda hesitated, then answered carefully. He told me someone in the family was asking unusual questions about inheritance. A chill ran through me. Even then, months before his death, Robert had already noticed. Linda continued. He wanted to understand warning signs. The implications hit hard. Robert hadn't been imagining things. He had been investigating, learning, preparing, protecting me, even while battling his own health problems. My eyes drifted toward the window. For several moments, I couldn't speak. Finally, I whispered. He was trying to protect me. Linda nodded. Yes. A long silence followed. Then she asked the question I had been avoiding. What do you want to do about the jewelry? I looked down at Robert's letters, the proposals, the plans, the evidence of months of thought. Then I thought about Megan, the transfer documents, the threats, the manipulation, the lies. And for the first time, I stopped asking myself what everyone else wanted. I asked myself what Robert would have wanted. More importantly, what I wanted. As I drove home that evening, the answer became clearer than it had ever been. I wasn't ready to make a final decision, not yet. But for the first time, I could see a future where the jewelry helped hundreds of women instead of satisfying one greedy person. And strangely enough, that future felt exactly like something Robert would have loved. The week after my visit to Hope Harbor was one of the loneliest weeks of my life. Not because Robert was gone. That loneliness had already settled into my heart. This was something different. This was the loneliness that comes from realizing people you love may not be standing beside you anymore. At first, the change was subtle. A missed phone call, a distant conversation, an awkward silence. Then it became impossible to ignore. The first call came from my sister-in-law, Patricia. She and I had always gotten along. Not perfectly, but well enough. When her name appeared on my phone, I answered with a smile. "Hi, Patricia." Her tone sounded strange, formal, almost cautious. "Janet, can I ask you something?" "Of course." There was a pause. Then she said, "Is it true you're refusing to share Robert's jewelry with the family?" My smile disappeared, immediately. "What?" "I've heard some concerning things." A knot formed in my stomach. "What exactly have you heard?" Another pause. Then she lowered her voice. "People are saying you've become obsessed with keeping everything for yourself." I sat perfectly still. For a moment, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Obsessed, keeping everything for myself. The accusation felt absurd, yet it was clear she believed there was at least some truth to it. I took a slow breath. "Patricia, who told you that?" Silence. That silence was answer enough. "Megan." It had to be. After we ended the call, I sat staring at my phone. Anger simmered beneath the surface. Not explosive anger, just disappointment. Deep disappointment. Because I knew exactly what was happening. Megan had started building a narrative, and unfortunately people were listening. Over the next several days, more calls arrived. A cousin from Cincinnati, a former family friend, even Robert's nephew. The details varied, the message remained the same. People believed I was being selfish. People believed I was withholding family heirlooms. People believed I was somehow betraying Robert's memory. Each conversation hurt, not because strangers were judging me. Because family was. People who had known me for decades. People who should have known better. Yet the most painful conversation came from Daniel. He called on Thursday evening. I answered immediately. "Hello?" His voice sounded tense. "Mom." Something in his tone told me I wasn't going to like what came next. "What is it?" He sighed heavily. "People are talking." I almost laughed. "They certainly are." "Mom!" "No, Daniel." My patience was wearing thin. "How many people has Megan spoken to?" Silence. Another answer without words. "Too many. Far too many." Finally, he said, "You could stop all this." I closed my eyes. There it was, the pressure again. Different packaging. Same goal. How? "You know how." The implication hung between us. "Give them the jewelry. Make the problem disappear. Reward manipulation. Reward greed. Reward bullying." I felt something harden inside me. "No." Daniel sighed again. Longer this time. Then he said something that broke my heart. "If you keep doing this, things are going to change." The warning immediately reminded me of Megan. The same language, the same strategy. "What does that mean?" Another pause. Then came the threat. Not direct, not obvious, but clear enough. "Sophie doesn't need to be caught in the middle of this." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My granddaughter. The one person in that house I trusted completely. "Are you threatening to keep Sophie away from me?" "No." But the hesitation before the word destroyed any credibility it had. "No," he repeated. "I'm saying family relationships become complicated." Complicated. Such a harmless word. Yet the meaning was obvious. My chest ached, not from anger, from heartbreak. Because my son was allowing this, whether he realized it or not, whether he intended it or not. He was helping Megan weaponize my relationship with my granddaughter, and that hurt more than anything else. After we hung up, I cried. Not for Robert, not for the jewelry, for Daniel. Because somewhere along the way, I had lost the son I raised. The following morning felt unusually quiet. Rain tapped gently against the windows. I sat at the kitchen table drinking coffee, trying to process everything. Then my phone buzzed. A text message. I expected another relative, another accusation, another guilt trip. Instead, I saw a name that immediately made me smile. Sophie. My granddaughter rarely texted me directly, especially lately. With trembling fingers, I opened the message. "Grandma, are you home?" I frowned. A second message arrived. "Can we talk?" My heart immediately softened. Of course. A few minutes later, another text appeared. "Please don't tell Mom." Now my concern grew. I quickly responded, "Are you okay?" Several seconds passed. Then her reply appeared. "Not really." An hour later, Sophie arrived at my house. Alone. The moment I opened the door, I could tell something was wrong. Her eyes looked red, as though she'd been crying. Without saying a word, she stepped forward and hugged me. I wrapped my arms around her. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" For a moment, she couldn't answer. Then she whispered, "I'm sorry." My heart broke. I guided her inside. We sat in the living room, the same room where Robert used to watch football every Sunday, the same room that now seemed to witness every painful moment in our family. Sophie stared at her hands, then finally spoke. "Mom talks about you all the time." I already suspected that, but hearing it confirmed still hurt. "What does she say?" Sophie hesitated, then looked down. "She says you're being selfish." I nodded slowly. "I see." "She tells people you're confused." The words hit hard, even though I already knew, even though Megan had said it to my face. Hearing that she'd repeated it to her own daughter felt different. Worse. Sophie wiped at her eyes. "You're not confused." "No, sweetheart." "I know." I reached over and squeezed her hand. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Then Sophie said something that changed everything. "Mom lies." The words came out quietly, yet they felt explosive. I looked at her carefully. "What do you mean?" She glanced toward the window, almost as though she feared someone might hear. Then she lowered her voice. "I heard Mom talking to Aunt Patricia." My pulse quickened. "What did she say?" Sophie swallowed. "She told Aunt Patricia that Grandpa wanted her to have the jewelry." I remained silent. Then she laughed. A chill ran through me. "Laughed?" Sophie nodded. "She said nobody could prove otherwise." For a moment, I couldn't speak. Nobody could prove otherwise. The sentence echoed inside my mind. Cold, calculated, deliberate. Exactly the kind of thing Robert had feared. Exactly the kind of thing Megan would never say publicly. Yet, here was Sophie, quietly telling the truth. Tears filled my granddaughter's eyes. "I don't want everyone fighting." Neither did I. I pulled her into another hug. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Then she whispered something that nearly broke my heart. "Grandpa wouldn't like this." I closed my eyes. "No," my voice cracked. "He wouldn't." As I held her, a realization slowly settled over me. The lies were spreading faster than I imagined. The pressure was increasing. The family was turning against me, exactly as Megan intended. But there was one thing she hadn't counted on. One person she couldn't completely control. One person who still valued honesty more than inheritance. Sophie. And something told me my granddaughter knew far more than she had shared so far. After Sophie left that afternoon, I couldn't stop thinking about what she had told me. Nobody could prove otherwise. The sentence echoed through my mind long after she was gone. It sounded exactly like something Megan would say. Confident, manipulative, certain she could control the narrative. For weeks, I had been piecing together fragments of a puzzle. Robert's letters, Thomas Bennett's warnings, Megan's behavior, Daniel's financial troubles, Sophie's observations. Every piece pointed in the same direction. But I still lacked one thing: proof, real proof, the kind that couldn't be explained away, the kind that could survive denial, the kind Robert had hinted might exist. 3 days later, I found it, completely by accident. I was cleaning Robert's home office. It was something I had been avoiding. Not because it was difficult physically, because it was difficult emotionally. Robert's office still looked exactly as he had left it. His favorite fountain pen sat beside the computer. Stacks of notebooks remained neatly organized. Family photographs covered the bookshelves. His reading glasses rested on a legal pad filled with handwritten notes. Walking into that room always felt like stepping backward in time. Part of me expected him to appear at any moment, smiling, asking if I wanted coffee, telling me about something interesting he'd read. Instead, there was only silence. That afternoon, I decided it was finally time. I began sorting through drawers. Most contained ordinary things: old receipts, warranty papers, instruction manuals, tax documents, nothing unusual. Then I reached the bottom drawer of his desk. The drawer stuck slightly. It always had. I pulled harder. The drawer slid open. Inside sat a small black case. I frowned. I had never seen it before. Carefully, I picked it up. The case wasn't locked. When I opened it, my breath caught. Inside was a flash drive. Nothing else. Just a simple USB drive. A small white label had been attached to it. Written in Robert's unmistakable handwriting were 3 words: if necessary. My pulse immediately quickened. The same wording, the same style, the same careful planning. This wasn't random. Robert had left this intentionally. For me. I sat down in his desk chair and stared at the drive. Part of me wanted to plug it in immediately. Another part was terrified of what I might find. Because each time Robert left me information, the truth became more troubling. Eventually, curiosity won. I turned on his computer. The machine hummed softly to life. A few moments later, I inserted the drive. Several folders appeared on the screen. Documents, audio files, videos. My hands began trembling. There was far more here than I expected. The first folder was labeled Personal Notes, the second Financial Records. The third, for Janet. I clicked the final folder. Immediately a video file appeared. Its title made my heart stop. Watch. First I hesitated, then pressed play. For several seconds the screen remained black. Then Robert appeared. My breath caught instantly. Seeing him again felt overwhelming. His face looked thinner than I remembered. His illness had already begun affecting him, but his eyes remained the same. Warm, kind, steady. I pressed a hand against my mouth. For a moment, I simply watched him, unable to move, unable to speak. Then he began talking. "Hello, sweetheart." My eyes immediately filled with tears. I hadn't heard those words in months, yet they felt exactly the same. "Hello, sweetheart." His voice was calm, gentle, the voice that had comforted me for 4 decades. "If you're watching this," he continued, "then things unfolded the way I feared they might." I wiped away tears, then listened carefully. "I hope I'm wrong. I truly do." He paused. "But if you're seeing this, then someone has likely begun pressuring you about the jewelry." A chill ran through me. Again. Robert had anticipated everything, every single thing. He continued speaking. "I didn't create these recordings because I wanted conflict. Another pause. I created them because I wanted protection. My heart pounded. Protection. The word felt important, very important. Then Robert took a slow breath. What he said next changed everything. About a year before recording this, Megan approached me privately. I froze. The room suddenly felt very still. She asked detailed questions about inheritance. I listened carefully. At first, I thought she was simply curious. His expression hardened slightly. But the conversations continued. I felt my stomach tighten. Robert glanced briefly downward, almost as though consulting notes. She repeatedly asked what would happen if you received the jewelry. I closed my eyes. Exactly what he had described in his letters. Only now I was hearing it directly from him, in his own voice, his own words. Then came the revelation. One afternoon, while I was recovering from a medical appointment, Megan arrived unexpectedly. Robert paused. His expression darkened. The change was subtle, yet unmistakable. She brought documents. A wave of nausea hit me. Documents, just like the ones she had recently placed in front of me. Robert continued. She asked me to sign papers transferring certain family assets. I sat perfectly still. My pulse thundered in my ears. She claimed it would simplify estate matters. His jaw tightened. That wasn't true. The room seemed to shrink around me. Robert wasn't speculating. He wasn't guessing. He was describing events that had actually happened. Events he had never told me about. Then came the moment that truly shocked me. Robert reached toward the camera, holding up several sheets of paper, copies, evidence. I kept records. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. I also kept something else. Then the video ended, abruptly. I blinked, confused. Why would it stop there? Immediately I searched the folder. A second video appeared. Part 2. I clicked it. Robert reappeared. This time, looking even more serious. The reason I'm documenting this is simple. He leaned forward. If someone is willing to pressure a sick man into signing paperwork, they may be willing to pressure a grieving widow. A chill ran through my entire body, because that was exactly what had happened. Exactly. Then Robert revealed something even worse. There were times I worried Daniel was being manipulated. I stared at the screen. Not controlled, not evil, manipulated. The distinction mattered. A lot. Robert continued. I don't believe my son is a bad man. Tears filled my eyes. Neither did I. I believe he's vulnerable. Another pause. And vulnerability can become dangerous when combined with desperation. The words hit hard, because now I knew about the debt, the financial problems, the pressure. Everything fit together. Then Robert delivered the final blow. I secretly recorded one conversation. My breath caught. Recorded, the screen went black. Another file automatically appeared. Audio recording. I stared at it. For several seconds I couldn't move. Then I pressed play. Static crackled briefly. Then voices emerged. Robert's voice and Megan's. Clear as day. My heart nearly stopped. The conversation wasn't long, only a few minutes, but it was devastating. Megan repeatedly pushed Robert to sign paperwork. Robert refused. Then came the sentence that changed everything. Once Janet gets emotional, she'll sign anything. I felt physically ill. The casual cruelty, the calculation, the certainty. It was horrifying. Then Megan laughed softly, a sound that now made my skin crawl. The recording ended. Silence filled the room. I stared at the computer screen, unable to process what I had just heard. Robert had been right. Every warning, every concern, every fear. He wasn't imagining things. He wasn't overreacting. He had seen the truth clearly, and he had spent his final months trying to protect me from it. I lowered my head into my hands. For several minutes I simply sat there, breathing, thinking, trying not to cry. Eventually I looked back at the screen. There were still more files, more documents, more evidence, but I already knew enough. Enough to understand that Megan's actions weren't recent. They weren't driven solely by grief or financial pressure. This had been building for years, and for the first time since Robert died, I realized something important. The truth was no longer hidden. The only question now was what I intended to do with it. I barely slept after discovering the files on Robert's flash drive. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Megan's voice again. "Once Janet gets emotional, she'll sign anything." The sentence replayed over and over in my head, not because it hurt my feelings, because it revealed exactly how she saw me. Not as family, not as Robert's widow, not as a person, as an obstacle. Something to manipulate, something to outmaneuver, something standing between her and what she wanted. By sunrise, I knew what I needed to do. I called Michael Carter, Robert's attorney, the man who had handled our legal affairs for nearly 20 years. We scheduled a meeting for that afternoon. As I drove to his office, I carried the flash drive, Robert's letters, and every document I had gathered. Part of me felt nervous. Another part felt strangely calm. For the first time since Robert's death, I wasn't searching for answers anymore. I was searching for clarity, and I suspected Michael could provide it. His office occupied the second floor of a historic brick building downtown. When I arrived, his receptionist immediately showed me inside. Michael stood as I entered. He was in his early 60s, professional, thoughtful, the kind of lawyer who listened more than he spoke. His face softened when he saw me. "Janet." He shook my hand warmly. "It's good to see you. I wish it were under better circumstances." "So do I." Once we sat down, I handed him the flash drive. Then I explained everything. The letters, the recordings, the conversations, Sophie's concerns, Megan's pressure campaign, Daniel's financial troubles. Michael listened carefully, never interrupting, never rushing. By the time I finished, nearly an hour had passed. The room remained quiet for several moments. Then Michael folded his hands. "Robert anticipated more than I realized." That statement immediately caught my attention. "You knew he was concerned." Michael nodded slowly. "Yes." I leaned forward. "How much did you know?" He sighed. "Not everything. But enough. Enough." For a moment, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief, frustration, curiosity. Part of me wished Robert had simply told me everything. Another part understood why he hadn't. He probably wanted to protect me, the way he always had. Michael opened a file drawer beside his desk. Then he removed a thick folder. My name appeared on the cover. Janet Arnold. My pulse quickened. "What is that?" Michael placed the folder on his desk. "Something Robert instructed me to keep." Of course. Another surprise, another layer, another piece of preparation. I almost smiled despite myself. Robert had apparently spent his final year planning for every possibility. Michael opened the folder. Inside were legal documents, estate paperwork, amendments, signed records, several pages covered in Robert's handwriting. "About 9 months before his death," Michael explained, "Robert requested major revisions to his estate plan." I frowned. "Major revisions?" "Yes." He slid a document toward me. I immediately recognized Robert's signature. He wanted to make certain decisions absolutely clear. My eyes moved across the page. The language was straightforward, precise, legally binding. Then I reached the section concerning the jewelry. My breath caught. "The Arnold family collection shall become the sole property of Janet Arnold upon Robert Arnold's death." No other individual shall possess legal claim ownership interest or decision-making authority regarding said collection. I read the passage twice. Then a third time. There was no ambiguity. None. Robert had removed every possible question, every possible loophole, every possible argument. The jewelry belonged to me, entirely, completely, without condition, without obligation, without compromise. Michael nodded toward the document. Legally speaking, the matter is settled. A wave of relief washed over me. For weeks, people had acted as though I owed them something, as though the jewelry was communal property, as though my wishes were secondary. Now the truth sat directly in front of me. In writing, signed, witnessed, recorded, final. What about Daniel? I asked. Michael shook his head. No claim. Megan, no claim. Anyone, no one. The answer felt surprisingly freeing, not because of the jewelry, because of the certainty. Then Michael leaned back in his chair. His expression grew more serious. There's something else. My stomach tightened. There always seemed to be something else. What? He opened another section of the file. Several financial documents appeared. Statements, loan records, credit reports. My eyes narrowed. What am I looking at? Michael hesitated, then answered carefully. Daniel's financial situation. Immediately my chest tightened. Part of me already knew it wouldn't be good. Still, I wasn't prepared for the reality. Michael slid one page toward me, then another, then another. Each document revealed a piece of the story. Business loans, credit obligations, investment losses, debt consolidation agreements. I stared at the numbers. The amounts were staggering, far worse than I had imagined. How much? Michael exhaled slowly. Approximately $300,000. I felt dizzy. 300,000, not 10,000, not 20,000, $300,000. For several moments, I couldn't speak. I simply stared at the paperwork, trying to process what I was seeing. How? The word barely emerged above a whisper. Michael chose his answer carefully. Poor investments. I closed my eyes. Robert had been right again. Daniel wasn't merely struggling. He was drowning. Then Michael showed me something that truly shocked me. A loan application. I immediately recognized Daniel's signature. The application referenced anticipated future inheritance. My stomach dropped. Future inheritance. The words felt like a punch. I looked up. Michael nodded grimly. Several lenders were told substantial family assets would eventually become available. The room seemed to tilt slightly. Suddenly, everything made sense. The urgency, the pressure, the obsession, the constant demands. Daniel wasn't simply hoping for the jewelry. He was counting on it, maybe even depending on it. I stared at the paperwork. Heartbroken, not angry. Heartbroken, because I remembered the little boy who collected baseball cards, the teenager who dreamed about starting a business someday, the young man who used to sit beside Robert on the porch discussing life. Where had that person gone? Or maybe a better question was this: how had he gotten so lost? Michael watched me carefully. I don't think Robert believed Daniel was malicious. I nodded. I know. He believed Daniel was vulnerable. The exact same word Robert had used in his recording. Vulnerable. Not evil. Not heartless. Vulnerable. Michael continued. Robert was far more concerned about Megan. Again, everyone kept arriving at the same conclusion. Robert, Thomas, Linda, Michael, different people, different perspectives. Same concern, same warning, same name. Then Michael reached for one final document, the last surprise of the afternoon, a signed authorization letter. I scanned the page. Then my eyes widened. What is this? Michael smiled faintly. Robert's final instruction regarding the jewelry. My pulse quickened. The letter granted me full authority to donate, auction, transfer, retain, or dispose of the collection in any lawful manner. No restrictions, no obligations, no conditions. Then I reached the final paragraph, and my eyes filled with tears. If Janet chooses to support charitable causes using these assets, she has my complete blessing and encouragement. Signed, Robert Arnold. I stared at the signature. For a moment, everything disappeared. The conflict, the pressure, the accusations, the manipulation. All of it. There was only Robert. His trust, his faith in me, his determination to protect me even after he was gone. Eventually, I looked back up at Michael. What would you do? He smiled gently. It doesn't matter what I would do. I laughed softly. Fair enough. He folded his hands. The only question that matters is what decision allows you to sleep peacefully at night. As I left his office later that afternoon, one thing had become crystal clear. The jewelry was legally mine. Robert had made that undeniable. But something else had become clear as well. Daniel and Megan weren't going to give up easily, because somewhere out there, creditors were waiting. Loans were due, and a $300,000 problem was rapidly becoming impossible for them to ignore. For nearly a week after meeting with Michael Carter, I did nothing. At least that's what everyone else believed. Megan thought I was hesitating. Daniel thought I was confused. Several relatives probably assumed I was finally feeling guilty. The truth was very different. I was thinking, carefully, deliberately. For the first time since Robert's death, nobody was pressuring me into a decision. Because I stopped answering those conversations. I stopped defending myself. I stopped explaining. And in the silence, something remarkable happened. I began hearing my own voice again. Not Megan's, not Daniel's, not the opinions of relatives. Mine. Every evening I sat on the back porch with Robert's letters. I read them repeatedly, not because I needed reminders, because I needed courage. One night, as the sun disappeared behind the trees, I found myself staring at the wedding ring still resting on my finger. 42 years. A lifetime. Robert had never tried to control me, not once. Even now, after his death, he wasn't controlling me. He was trusting me. The difference mattered. And suddenly I realized something. I already knew what I wanted to do. I had known for days, maybe even weeks. I was simply afraid of the consequences. The following morning, I called Linda Brooks. She answered immediately. Janet. Her warm voice instantly made me smile. Hello, Linda. How are you doing? I looked out the kitchen window. The answer felt surprisingly simple. Better. And for the first time, it was true. Linda remained quiet, as though sensing there was more. There's something I need to tell you. I'm listening. I took a deep breath. Then I finally said the words aloud. I've made my decision. The silence on the other end lasted only a second, but it felt longer. Then Linda spoke softly. Are you sure? I glanced toward Robert's photograph sitting on the counter. The picture had been taken during a vacation years earlier. He was smiling, happy, peaceful. The sight of it strengthened my resolve. Yes, I heard emotion in Linda's voice. What would you like to do? I smiled. The jewelry is going to Hope Harbor. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Then Linda quietly whispered, Robert would be proud of you. Tears instantly filled my eyes. Not sad tears, different tears. The kind that come when something finally feels right. We spent the next hour discussing details. The collection would be professionally auctioned. The proceeds would establish a permanent fund, the Janet Arnold Assistance Fund, exactly as Robert had envisioned. The money would help older women facing financial abuse, emergency housing, legal assistance, counseling, protection, a future. By the end of the conversation, I felt lighter than I had in months. For the first time, the jewelry no longer felt like a burden. It felt like purpose. 3 days later, I sat in a conference room at Hope Harbor. Several documents lay in front of me. Legal agreements, donation records, auction arrangements, the final paperwork. Linda sat beside me. A representative from the auction house sat across the table. Everything was ready. All that remained was my signature. I stared at the papers. Not because I doubted myself, because of what they represented. 42 years of memories, family history, pieces passed down through generations. Once I signed, there would be no going back. The collection would belong to the foundation. Not me, not Daniel, not Megan, not anyone. I thought about Robert, his letters, his recordings, his plans, his trust. Then I picked up the pen and signed. One signature, then another, then another. When I finished, the room remained silent for a moment. The representative gathered the paperwork. Linda reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "It's official." Official. The word settled over me, and surprisingly I felt relief. Not loss. Relief. The decision was made. Nobody could pressure me anymore. Nobody could manipulate me. Nobody could guilt me. The future of the jewelry had been decided. That evening, I returned home feeling strangely peaceful. The peace lasted almost 24 hours. Then Megan called. I watched her name appear on my phone screen. Once, twice, 3 times. I ignored every call. The next morning, Daniel called. I ignored him too. Then came text messages. "Where are we with the jewelry? We need to talk. Call me back." The urgency was obvious. The desperation was growing. Still, I remained silent, because for once I wasn't interested in arguing. By Friday afternoon, I received another message. This one from Megan. The tone immediately caught my attention. "We deserve to know what's happening." Deserve. The word almost made me laugh. After everything that had happened, she still believed entitlement was her strongest argument. I didn't respond. That evening, Linda called. The auction date had been finalized. The foundation planned a fundraising gala. Several major donors would attend. Community leaders, local media, supporters. And there was one more detail. "We'd like to honor Robert." My throat tightened. "How?" Linda smiled through the phone. "We'd like to share his story." For several moments, I couldn't speak. Robert had never cared about recognition, but he had cared about helping people, more than anything. "I think he'd like that." "We do too." Then she added something unexpected. "We'd also like to recognize you." I laughed softly. "Why?" "Because none of this happens without your decision." I looked toward the photograph on my mantel. The one that always seemed to make me feel Robert was still nearby. This wasn't just my decision. "No," Linda agreed. "It wasn't." A few days later, formal invitations for the gala were printed. I stared at the stack sitting on my kitchen table. One envelope immediately caught my attention. Daniel Arnold and Megan Arnold. For a long moment, I simply looked at it. Then I smiled. Not out of revenge, not out of spite, because they deserved to witness what happened next. Eventually, I addressed the envelope and placed it with the others. The invitation itself revealed very little. Only the date, the location, and the fact that Hope Harbor would be announcing a major new initiative. Nothing about the jewelry, nothing about the donation, nothing about the fund, nothing about Robert. The surprise remained intact. As I slipped the envelope into the mailbox the following morning, I felt a curious sense of calm. For weeks, Megan had believed she controlled the situation. She believed the outcome depended on her pressure, her manipulation, her persistence. She couldn't have been more wrong, because while she spent her energy trying to take something from me, I had already given it away. And in just a few weeks, she was going to learn that in front of an entire room full of people. The night of the gala arrived on a cool autumn evening. As I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, I felt surprisingly calm. Not because I knew what was coming, because I finally knew I had done the right thing. For weeks I had questioned myself, second-guessed myself, wondered whether I was being too stubborn, too emotional, too harsh. But those doubts had faded. The decision was made. The jewelry belonged to Hope Harbor now, and no amount of pressure could change that. I adjusted the simple navy blue dress I had chosen for the event, nothing extravagant. Robert always used to tell me I looked beautiful in blue. The memory made me smile. Then I glanced at the framed photograph sitting on my dresser. It showed us on our 40th wedding anniversary. Robert had his arm around me, both of us laughing, happy, unaware of how much would change in just a few years. "I hope you'd approve," I whispered. For some reason, I felt certain he would. An hour later, I arrived at the downtown hotel hosting the gala. The ballroom was already buzzing with activity. Soft music played. Round tables filled the room. Volunteers moved between guests. Donors mingled near the stage. Large screens displayed information about Hope Harbor's programs. The atmosphere felt hopeful, purposeful, warm, exactly the kind of event Robert would have enjoyed. Linda Brooks greeted me almost immediately. She hugged me tightly. "You look wonderful." "So do you." She smiled. "Are you ready?" I glanced toward the stage. The large projection screen hung above it. Rows of chairs stretched across the ballroom. Everything was prepared. Everything was in place. "As ready as I'll ever be." Linda squeezed my hand, then lowered her voice. "Your guests have arrived." I followed her gaze, and there they were, Daniel, Megan, and Sophie. The sight of my granddaughter immediately softened my heart. She smiled when she saw me, a genuine smile, the kind that reached her eyes. I waved. She waved back. Daniel looked nervous, very nervous. His gaze moved repeatedly around the room, almost as though he were trying to understand why so many important people had gathered. Megan looked different, confident, excited, almost triumphant. She wore an expensive black evening gown. Diamond earrings sparkled beneath the ballroom lights. She looked like someone expecting good news. Very good news. For a brief moment, I wondered what story she had created inside her own mind. Perhaps she believed the gala was some kind of inheritance ceremony. Perhaps she imagined the jewelry would be publicly presented to her. Whatever she expected, she clearly felt optimistic. And that made what was about to happen even more significant. The evening began with dinner. Then several speakers took the stage. Community leaders discussed financial abuse among seniors. Volunteers shared stories. Supporters described the impact of Hope Harbor's programs. The audience listened attentively. Many appeared deeply moved. I noticed Daniel watching carefully, actually listening, perhaps for the first time. Megan seemed less interested. She kept glancing toward me, toward Linda, toward the stage. Waiting, expecting, anticipating. Finally, nearly 2 hours into the event, Linda returned to the microphone. The room gradually quieted. Conversation stopped. Attention shifted toward the stage. I felt my pulse quicken. This was it. Linda smiled warmly at the audience. "Tonight, we have the privilege of announcing something very special." The ballroom grew silent. She continued. "For years, Hope Harbor has dreamed of expanding our services." A large slide appeared behind her. Statistics, programs, future goals. Linda spoke for several minutes about the organization's mission. Then she paused. The room waited. I noticed Megan sitting slightly straighter. Her expression brightened. She clearly believed something important was coming. She was right, just not in the way she expected. Linda smiled. "A few months ago, we were approached by someone whose generosity will change countless lives." The screen behind her changed again. A photograph appeared. Robert, The moment his image filled the screen, my throat tightened. A soft murmur moved through the audience. Linda's voice became gentle. Many people leave behind money. She paused. Some leave behind possessions. Another pause. A few leave behind something far more valuable. I felt tears beginning to form. Across the room, Daniel stared at the photograph. His expression immediately changed. The nervousness disappeared. In its place appeared grief. Real grief. Perhaps for the first time since the funeral. Then Linda continued, "Tonight we honor Robert Arnold." Applause filled the ballroom. I swallowed hard. Beside me, several guests smiled. Others nodded respectfully. The applause continued for nearly 30 seconds. When it finally ended, Linda spoke again. Robert believed that dignity matters. The screen displayed another image, a photograph of Robert and me together. He believed older women deserve protection. Another image. He believed family should never be used as a weapon. The words hung in the air. Powerful. Uncomfortable. True. Then came the moment everything changed. Linda looked directly toward the audience. "We are honored to announce the creation of the Janet Arnold Assistance Fund." For a second, absolute silence filled the room. Then applause erupted. Loud, sincere, overwhelming. I blinked rapidly as tears filled my eyes. People stood. Several guests rose to their feet. Others followed. Within seconds, most of the ballroom was applauding, standing, cheering, honoring Robert, honoring the mission, honoring the future. Then I looked toward Daniel. Shock covered his face. Pure shock. Beside him, Sophie looked delighted, proud, happy. And Megan looked confused. Very confused. I could almost see the calculations happening inside her head, trying to understand, trying to catch up, trying to figure out what she had missed. Then Linda delivered the final announcement. The fund has been established through the donation of the Arnold family jewelry collection. The room exploded into applause again. A slideshow immediately appeared on the screen. Photographs of the jewelry, the necklace, the bracelet, the earrings, the entire collection, displayed one by one, and beneath each image appeared a simple message. Donated by Janet Arnold in honor of Robert Arnold. I watched Megan's face lose all color. The transformation happened instantly. Her smile vanished. Her eyes widened. Her mouth opened slightly. She looked as though someone had physically struck her. For several seconds, she simply stared at the screen, unable to move, unable to react, unable to believe what she was seeing. The jewelry was gone, not transferred, not inherited, gone, donated, beyond her reach forever. Around the ballroom, applause continued. People smiled. Some wiped away tears. Others praised the generosity of the gift. But Megan heard none of it, because in that moment, her dream of owning the collection had died in front of hundreds of witnesses. And deep down, I knew the evening wasn't over yet, because there was still one thing the audience hadn't seen. One final gift Robert had left behind. And when it appeared, everything would change again. The applause continued for nearly a full minute. People smiled, some stood, others wiped tears from their eyes. The donation had touched them. The mission had inspired them. And for the first time in months, I felt something I hadn't expected. Peace. Not because Megan was shocked. Not because the jewelry was gone. Because Robert's wishes were finally being honored. When the applause eventually faded, Linda returned to the microphone. Her expression was warm, but there was something else in her eyes. Something deliberate. Something planned. I immediately knew what was coming. The final surprise. The last gift Robert had left behind. Linda waited until the room settled. Then she spoke. Before we conclude tonight's program, there is one more thing. The audience grew quiet again. Across the room, Megan sat perfectly still. Her face remained pale, her expression unreadable. Daniel looked exhausted. Sophie watched the stage attentively. Linda smiled gently. Several months before his passing, Robert Arnold recorded a message. A ripple moved through the audience. My throat tightened. Even though I already knew about the recordings, hearing those words felt emotional. The large screen behind the stage faded to black. The ballroom became silent. Then Robert appeared. The same recording I had watched alone in his office. Only now, hundreds of people were seeing it too. A collective hush filled the room. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. There was only Robert. His face, his voice, his presence. Hello. The simple greeting echoed through the ballroom. I immediately felt tears forming. Not because he looked sick, because he looked like himself. Kind, steady, familiar. The man I had loved for 42 years. Robert smiled softly. If you're watching this, then I didn't get the chance to say everything I wanted to say. The room remained completely silent. People leaned forward, listening, watching, feeling. Then Robert continued. First, I want to speak to my wife. My chest tightened. The entire audience disappeared. For a moment, it felt as though he were speaking only to me. Janet. The sound of my name in his voice nearly broke me. You gave me the happiest years of my life. Tears spilled down my cheeks. I didn't bother wiping them away. There was no point. Everyone in the room was emotional. Many were crying too. Robert smiled again. You stood beside me when we had nothing. A photograph appeared beside him, an old picture from our 20s, standing in front of our first apartment, laughing, young, hopeful. The audience smiled. Then another photo appeared, our wedding day. Another, holding newborn Daniel. Another, family vacations, anniversaries, birthdays, decades of memories. You were my partner in every meaningful thing I ever accomplished. His voice remained calm, but I could hear emotion beneath it. And if this foundation exists today, it's because of the values you helped build. I pressed a trembling hand against my chest. The room felt too emotional to breathe. Then Robert shifted slightly. His expression grew more serious. Not angry, not bitter, just honest. There is something else I want to say. The audience quieted even further. I've learned that money reveals character. No one moved. No one spoke. It doesn't create character. A pause. It reveals it. The words hung in the air. Simple, powerful, true. Robert continued. When people believe something valuable is within reach, they often show you who they really are. Across the room, I noticed Megan sitting rigidly in her chair. Her jaw tightened. Her eyes never left the screen. Robert wasn't naming names. He didn't need to. Everyone could feel the message. Then he said something that caused a visible reaction throughout the audience. Family should never become a business transaction. Silence. Love should never be conditional. More silence. And no one should be pressured into surrendering their dignity. I saw several people nodding. Others exchanged glances. The truth in those statements was impossible to ignore. Then Robert looked directly into the camera, almost as though he were speaking to someone specific. If anyone ever tries to use guilt manipulation or entitlement to obtain something from you, remember this. He paused. Love and greed cannot occupy the same space for very long. A chill moved through the ballroom. I saw Daniel lower his head, slowly, almost involuntarily. The words were reaching him, maybe for the first time. Then Robert smiled again. The tension eased slightly. His expression softened. I hope the jewelry helps people. Another photograph appeared. Hope Harbor, the women, the programs, the future. I hope it protects someone. Another image. I hope it gives someone a second chance. Another image. I hope it becomes something larger than a collection of diamonds. Tears filled my eyes again, because that was exactly what had happened. Exactly. Then came the moment that truly changed everything. Robert looked directly into the camera and said something I never expected. To my son. Daniel immediately froze. The room seemed to hold its breath. Robert's expression became gentle, compassionate, fatherly. Daniel, if you're watching this, I want you to hear me carefully. My son stared at the screen, completely motionless. I love you. The words landed heavily, deeply. I always will. A long pause followed. Then Robert continued. But loving someone doesn't mean protecting them from consequences. Daniel's eyes filled with tears. The audience remained silent. No one wanted to interrupt the moment. Robert sighed softly. You have a good heart. Another pause. But a good heart becomes dangerous when fear starts making decisions. I saw Daniel close his eyes. His shoulders trembled slightly. Robert wasn't attacking him. That somehow made it even more powerful. You are stronger than you think. More silence. Do not allow desperation to decide who you become. A tear slid down Daniel's face. Then another. Sophie reached over and quietly took his hand. The sight nearly broke my heart, because for the first time in months I saw my son. Not the angry version, not the defensive version, the real one, the frightened one, the wounded one, the one Robert still believed could be saved. Then Robert delivered his final message. Not to Daniel, not to me, to everyone. If there is one thing I hope people remember, it is this. The room became utterly silent. Your legacy is not what you leave behind. A pause. It's what you leave inside other people. I closed my eyes. The sentence hit me harder than anything else. Because that was Robert, not the jewelry, not the money, not the inheritance, the man, his kindness, his integrity, his love. That was the real legacy. The screen slowly faded to black. For several seconds, absolute silence filled the ballroom. No applause, no movement, nothing. People simply sat there, feeling, processing, remembering. Then someone stood. Then another. Then another. Within moments, the entire room rose to its feet. The applause was thunderous, emotional, sincere, lasting. I glanced toward Daniel. He was crying openly now. No embarrassment, no pride, no defenses, just grief. Real grief, and maybe something else, regret. As for Megan, she looked completely defeated. Not angry, not outraged. Defeated. Because for the first time, she had lost control of the story. Robert had told it himself, and there was nothing she could do about that. The gala ended almost an hour after Robert's video finished. Even then, many people remained in the ballroom, talking, reflecting, sharing stories. Several guests approached me to express their admiration for Robert. Others wanted to learn more about the foundation. A few simply hugged me. The entire evening felt surreal. For months, I had been carrying grief, confusion, and pressure. Now, for the first time, those burdens felt lighter. Not gone, just lighter. Eventually, the crowd began to thin. Volunteers packed equipment. Staff members cleared tables. Guests slowly headed home. I was saying goodbye to Linda when I noticed someone standing near the entrance, waiting, watching. Daniel. My heart immediately tightened. Not from anger, from uncertainty. He looked exhausted. His tie hung loose around his neck. His eyes were red. He seemed older somehow, not physically, emotionally, like a man who had spent years carrying something too heavy. Linda quietly squeezed my arm. "I'll give you two some privacy." I nodded, then watched her walk away. A few moments later, Daniel approached. Neither of us spoke at first. The silence wasn't hostile, just uncomfortable. Finally, he stopped a few feet away. "Mom." His voice cracked slightly. The sound surprised me. For months, every conversation between us had involved pressure, arguments, defensiveness. Tonight felt different. I waited. He looked down briefly, then back at me. "I'm sorry." The words hung between us, simple, direct, sincere. Yet I wasn't ready to respond, not because I wanted revenge, because some wounds deserve honesty, and honesty takes time. Daniel swallowed hard. I should have listened. Still, I remained silent. He nodded slowly, as though he understood why. "I know saying sorry doesn't fix anything." "No." My voice came out softer than I expected. "It doesn't." He lowered his head. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he surprised me. I didn't know about the recording. I studied his face carefully. The pain looked genuine. The shock looked genuine. Everything about him felt genuine, for the first time in a very long time. "I believe you." His shoulders relaxed slightly, just slightly. Then he looked toward the now empty stage. "Dad knew." The statement wasn't really a question, just a realization, a painful one. "Yes." Daniel nodded slowly. Tears appeared again. "I thought I was protecting my family." I didn't interrupt. He needed to say it, needed to hear it himself. "I thought if I could solve the debt, everything would get better." His voice shook. "But I kept making worse decisions." I remembered Michael's words. Vulnerable. Not evil. Vulnerable. Looking at my son now, I finally understood exactly what Robert had meant. Daniel wasn't a villain. He was a man who had allowed fear to become his compass, and fear almost always leads people somewhere dangerous. I was ashamed, he admitted. The confession came quietly, almost like a child admitting a mistake. I couldn't tell you how bad things were. My heart hurt because I believed him. I really did. When did it start? He rubbed his eyes. Years ago. Then came the full story. Business investments, poor partnerships, bad financial decisions, credit cards used to cover losses, loans used to cover other loans, a cycle that kept growing and growing and growing. Each decision created another problem. Each problem created another lie. Eventually, he no longer knew how to escape. As he spoke, I realized something important. This wasn't about greed anymore. It hadn't been for a long time. It was about panic, desperation, shame. The jewelry simply became the solution he convinced himself would save him. Unfortunately, desperation had made him vulnerable to Megan's influence. When he finally finished speaking, we stood in silence. Then I asked the question that mattered most. "Why didn't you come to me?" His answer broke my heart. Because I didn't want Dad to be disappointed in me. Tears instantly filled my eyes. Because Robert wouldn't have been disappointed. Concerned, absolutely. Worried, without question. But disappointed, never. That wasn't who he was. I stepped closer. "Your father loved you." Daniel nodded, still crying. I know. He always loved you. Another nod. I know. Then I said something I had needed him to hear for months. But you hurt me. The words landed heavily. His face crumpled immediately. Not because they were cruel, because they were true. You let me stand alone. A tear slid down his cheek. You watched people attack me. Another tear. You knew I was grieving. His head dropped. And you still chose silence. The silence that followed felt enormous, painful, necessary, because forgiveness without truth isn't forgiveness, it's avoidance. Eventually, Daniel whispered, "You're right." 3 simple words, no excuses, no arguments, no blame, just accountability, and somehow that mattered a lot. We talked for nearly another hour, not about jewelry, not about money, about family, about Robert, about mistakes, about consequences, about healing. When the conversation finally ended, I felt emotionally exhausted. Yet something had changed, not fixed. Changed. There is a difference. Trust wasn't magically restored. Years of hurt don't disappear in one evening, but a door had opened, a small one, a fragile one. Still, it was there. As we prepared to leave, another voice interrupted. "Grandma!" I turned. Sophie. She had been waiting near the lobby. Patiently, quietly, the moment she saw me, she ran forward and wrapped her arms around me. I hugged her tightly, perhaps tighter than I intended. For a moment, neither of us wanted to let go. Then she smiled, a real smile, the first carefree smile I had seen from her in months. "I'm proud of you." My throat tightened. "Thank you, sweetheart." She looked up at me. Grandpa would be proud too. That nearly broke me, because she was right. I hoped he would be. I really did. Then Sophie surprised me. "Can I stay with you this weekend?" I blinked. "What?" She glanced toward Daniel, then back at me. "I just want some peace." The honesty made me laugh softly. Daniel laughed too, the first genuine laugh I had heard from him in a very long time. "I think that's fair," he said. For a brief moment, things felt normal again. Not perfect, but normal. Then another realization hit me. Megan was nowhere to be seen. I hadn't noticed her leave. Daniel followed my gaze. His expression immediately changed. More sadness, less anger. "She went home." I nodded. Neither of us said more. There wasn't much left to say. Some people learn from consequences. Some don't. That choice belonged to Megan now. As Sophie and I walked toward the parking lot later that night, the cool air felt refreshing. The city lights glowed in the distance. The future still contained uncertainty. Challenges remained. Relationships needed repair. Trust needed rebuilding. But for the first time since Robert died, hope felt stronger than fear. And as my granddaughter slipped her hand into mine, I realized something. The jewelry had never been the real inheritance. The real inheritance was sitting beside me. Integrity, compassion, courage, the values Robert spent a lifetime teaching. And somehow, despite everything that had happened, those values had survived. It has been almost 2 years since the night of the Hope Harbor Gala. 2 years since Robert's final message played on that screen. 2 years since the jewelry collection left our family forever. And 2 years since I finally understood what my husband had been trying to teach me all along. Sometimes people ask whether I regret giving the jewelry away. The answer surprises them. Not for a second. Not once. Because what happened afterward proved that Robert had been right. The jewelry was never the treasure. The people it helped became the treasure. The first year after the gala was busy, busier than I ever expected. The Janet Arnold Assistance Fund officially launched 6 months after the auction. The jewelry collection ultimately sold for more than anyone anticipated. Several bidders became emotionally invested after hearing Robert's story. The final proceeds exceeded $400,000. Combined with additional donations generated by the gala, the fund opened stronger than anyone imagined. Hope Harbor expanded its services. Emergency grants became available. Legal support increased, counseling programs grew, housing assistance reached more women. And every time Linda shared an update, I felt a little closer to Robert. Not because of the money, because of the purpose. One afternoon, nearly a year after the auction, Linda invited me to meet several women who had received assistance through the fund. I was nervous, more nervous than I expected. The experience changed me. One woman had escaped financial abuse by her adult son. Another had nearly lost her home after being manipulated by relatives. Another had spent years believing she deserved mistreatment because family comes first. Listening to their stories was painful, but it was also powerful, because every one of them had survived. Every one of them was rebuilding, and every one of them reminded me why the jewelry had needed a larger purpose. That day, as I drove home, I cried. Not from sadness, from gratitude, because something beautiful had emerged from something painful, and that felt like the most Robert thing imaginable. My relationship with Daniel changed too. Slowly, very slowly. Healing rarely happens in dramatic moments. It happens through small choices. Consistent choices. The first step came a few weeks after the gala. Daniel began attending financial counseling. Then he sold several investments. After that, he downsized his lifestyle. The process was difficult, humbling, sometimes embarrassing. But he stayed committed. For the first time in years, he stopped looking for shortcuts and started accepting responsibility. That mattered more to me than any apology ever could. We still had difficult conversations. There were still painful memories, still moments when trust felt fragile. But little by little, my son returned. Not the perfect version, the honest version, the real version. And that was enough. One evening, nearly a year after the gala, Daniel joined me on the back porch. The same porch where Robert and I had spent countless evenings together. The sunset painted the sky orange and gold. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then Daniel looked at me and quietly said, "Dad saved me." I turned toward him. He smiled sadly. "I just didn't realize it until after he was gone." The words hit me harder than he probably intended, because they were true. Robert had tried to save all of us, not through money, not through control, through truth. Daniel stared toward the horizon. If I'd gotten the jewelry, I would have used it to avoid the real problem. I nodded, because I knew that too. The jewelry would have delayed consequences, not solved them. And sometimes, consequences are exactly what people need. As for Sophie, she flourished. She visited often, sometimes every weekend, sometimes just for dinner, sometimes for no reason at all. Those weekends became some of the happiest moments of my life. We baked cookies, watched old movies, talked about school, talked about Robert, talked about life. One afternoon, she asked me a question I'll never forget. "Grandma, do you think Grandpa knew all this would happen?" I laughed softly. "Not all of it," she smiled. "But some of it." I looked at a photograph of Robert sitting on the mantel, the same photograph I still greeted every morning. "Your grandfather was a very wise man." She nodded thoughtfully. "I think so too." Then there was Megan. People often ask what happened to her. The answer is complicated. She and Daniel eventually separated, not immediately, not dramatically, just gradually. The cracks that had existed for years finally became impossible to ignore. Financial pressure, broken trust, different values. Eventually they chose different paths. I don't celebrate that outcome. I never wanted my family to fall apart. But I also learned something important. You cannot save relationships built on manipulation. The other person must choose honesty, and not everyone makes that choice. The last time I spoke with Megan was over a year ago. The conversation was brief, polite, distant. There was no dramatic confrontation, no revenge, no victory speech. Life isn't always like that. Sometimes people simply leave your story, and that becomes its own ending. Today, my life looks very different than it did when Robert died. The grief remains. I suspect it always will. When you've loved someone for 42 years, that you don't stop missing them. You simply learn how to carry the absence. Some mornings I still reach across the bed. Some days I still catch myself wanting to tell him something. Some evenings I still sit on the porch and imagine what he would say. But the sadness no longer defines every moment. The love does. And that makes all the difference. People sometimes assume the most valuable thing Robert left behind was the jewelry collection. They couldn't be more wrong. The most valuable thing he left behind was courage. The courage to trust my instincts. The courage to set boundaries. The courage to choose dignity over pressure. The courage to stand alone when necessary. And perhaps, most importantly, the courage to remember my own worth. Today, there is only one piece of jewelry I still own. My wedding ring. Simple. Unremarkable. Worth very little on paper. Yet it means more to me than every diamond in the collection combined. Because when I look at it, I don't see wealth. I see 42 years of love. I see loyalty. I see friendship. I see a man who spent his final months protecting the people he cared about. And I see the greatest inheritance he ever gave me. Not money, not possessions, not property. The belief that even after devastating loss, it is still possible to choose grace. It is still possible to choose purpose. And it is still possible to build something beautiful from broken pieces. When I look back on everything that happened, I realize this story was never really about jewelry. It was about choices. Every person in this story faced a choice between love and greed, between honesty and manipulation, between responsibility and excuses. The truth is that family relationships are precious, but they should never require us to sacrifice our dignity. Love is not supposed to be controlled through guilt, fear, pressure, or obligation. Real love respects boundaries. Real love honors truth. I also learned that growing older does not make your voice less valuable. Too many older adults are told they are confused, emotional, or incapable when someone wants control over their decisions. Never allow anyone to convince you that your wisdom no longer matters. Another lesson is that consequences are not cruelty. Sometimes, the people we love need to face the results of their own choices before they can grow. Protecting someone from every consequence may actually prevent them from becoming the person they were meant to be. Most importantly, I learned that a meaningful legacy is not measured by what we leave behind. It is measured by the lives we touch, the values we teach, and the kindness we inspire in others. Robert's diamonds helped many women, but Robert's character helped even more. And that is the kind of legacy worth leaving. If this story touched your heart, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What would you have done if you were in my position? Do you think Janet made the right decision? Share your opinion in the comments below. And if you enjoy heartfelt family stories about resilience, justice, and second chances, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and join us for more stories. Thank you for spending this time with me.